stretches across nearly 500 acres of land. All around is open desert with occasional patches of shrubs and forested areas. The house sits right in the center of the property, from where almost every direction can be seen without obstruction. This place is extremely isolated and cut off from the outside world. There is virtually no town or settlement nearby. At night, the entire area is plunged into complete darkness. No light or sound comes from a distance. The surroundings are so empty that apart from the nearby line of trees, nothing else catches the eye. This very isolation later became the biggest problem for the family. Because if anything went wrong, there was no one nearby to call for help. Even screaming would not have been heard by anyone. The routes of escape were also limited. This isolation and loneliness made the entire experience even more mentally devastating for the family. Whatever they saw or felt, there was no way to tell anyone or ask for help. This loneliness and desolation made the whole story far more terrifying. 2. The ranch was built in the late 1800s or at the very beginning of the 1900s. This means the ranch is well over 100 years old. People have been living on this land for a very long time, but every family that came here ended up leaving for one reason or another. The old structure of the ranch and the house itself shows how ancient it is and how much history it has witnessed. When the Sherman family bought it, the condition of the house was quite dilapidated. The grass had overgrown, things were scattered everywhere, and everything was waiting to be repaired. But as new owners, they did not pay much attention to all of this, because their eyes were filled with nothing but dreams. They thought they would fix everything in time. This old house had many secrets hidden within it that they did not yet know about. The walls, doors, and windows of the house carried old marks and signs. Those marks were perhaps the testimony of the fear and suffering of the previous residents. But the Sherman family could not understand that at the time. 3. The history of this land is very old and very bloody. At one time, the Navajo tribe lived peacefully in this area. To them, this land was sacred and dear, but the Ute tribe was extremely powerful and cruel. The Ute tribe would capture Navajo people and sell them into slavery to the United States. Because of this brutal treatment, the Navajo were forced to leave the land of their ancestors. The land on which they had lived for generations was being taken from them, and their hearts broke as they were forced to leave. Their anger and hatred toward the Utes was immense. They had resolved to take revenge. But they could not match the Utes in strength, so they chose a different path. That path was to use their most powerful spiritual weapon, and that weapon was the Skinwalker Curse, which later changed this land forever. 4. Before leaving, the Navajo placed the Skinwalker Curse upon this land. This curse was meant to punish the Ute tribe forever. According to Navajo belief, a Skinwalker is a kind of witch or supernatural being with extraordinary powers. They can take the form of any predatory animal. They especially have the ability to transform into large wolves and foxes. Taking these forms, they torment, terrorize, and drive away anyone who lives on the cursed land. According to Navajo belief, once this curse is placed, it cannot be easily removed. The effects of this curse continue from generation to generation. Anyone who comes to live on this land becomes a victim of the curse. Later, when the ranch's owners began seeing strange creatures and supernatural events, they researched and discovered the story of this curse. But by then, it was already too late. Before the Sherman family purchased it, the ranch had been completely abandoned for several years. The previous owners had suddenly left the place for some reason. No clear explanation was ever given for why they left. But the condition of the inside of the house suggested that they perhaps left in a great hurry. Because no one had lived there for so many years, the grass around the house had grown wild. Things were scattered and lying in neglect. Since the house had not been used for a long time, dust and darkness had settled inside. But the Sherman family was not discouraged by this condition. Rather, they thought that getting such a large piece of land at such a low price was already a great blessing. They assumed that with time everything would be fixed, but they did not yet know the real reason behind why it had been left abandoned. 6. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased this ranch. Since the ranch had been abandoned for several years, they got it for a price far below its market value. Seeing this price, they were extremely happy. To them, it felt like the best decision of their lives. Terry was an experienced rancher with special skills in cattle farming. Gwen was a hard-working and brave woman. Both of them were dreaming of building a cattle farm on this vast land. They would live happily with their family, graze their cattle across 500 acres, and build a beautiful life. But this dream very quickly began turning into a nightmare. 7. Asterisk 720 Sherman were cattle ranchers by profession. Cattle farming was the main source of their livelihood. To them, cattle were not just animals, they were their wealth and their life. This vast land of 500 acres was like a dream come true for them. They were extremely excited thinking about how many cattle they could raise in such a large space. They were experienced in cattle farming and were strong-minded people. They had the experience of protecting cattle from wildlife and always kept weapons with them and could handle any situation. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to start happening on this ranch. Asterisk 8. Asterisk. On the very day the Sherman family first entered the ranch, they noticed some strange things. Every door of the house had locks on both the inside and the outside. Not just the outer doors, but every single interior door within the house also had multiple locks. Every window was similarly set up to be locked from both inside and outside. Seeing so many locks would make any normal person afraid and raise questions. But the Sherman family was so excited at that moment that they took this abnormal detail as something normal. They thought that in such an isolated place, the previous owners had probably installed all these locks for safety reasons. But in reality, these locks were evidence of the extreme fear and terror experienced by the previous residents. Twin end. As per door and back door of the house, large iron stakes had been driven deep into the ground. Thick, heavy chains hung from those stakes. From the size of the chains and stakes, it was obvious that at one time, extremely powerful and large dogs had been kept tied there. Ordinary dogs do not need chains this thick and stakes this large. Just looking at these chains and stakes, it was clear that the previous owners kept massive guard dogs. They had taken such strict measures for their own protection. But even then, the final protection had failed, which is why they had left the place. The Sherman family did not pay much attention to this either. They thought that keeping large dogs in such a remote and isolated area was perfectly natural. Ask. On the day they were unloading, family members were carrying things from the truck into the house together. Since the house was located in the middle of the property, it was clearly visible from all directions. Suddenly, Terry spotted a massive wolf near the tree line in the distance. The wolf was still very far away and was slowly moving toward them in a winding serpentine path. Terry warned his family, and everyone stood watching the wolf. As an experienced rancher, Terry knew wolves could be present in the area. So at first he was not very alarmed. But as the wolf got closer and its size became apparent, everyone was left stunned. It did not take long to realize that this was no ordinary wolf. Asterisk 11. As the wolf came closer, Terry noticed it standing near a fence. The gap between two fence posts was about 6 feet. When the wolf stood next to that fence, it became clear that the animal was nearly 6 feet long, that is 3 times the size of a normal wolf. Terry thought his eyes might be playing tricks on him, but with the wolf standing right next to the fence, there was no room for doubt. He had never seen a wolf that large in his entire life. The rest of the family said the same thing. No one could believe that something so large was walking toward them. Asterisk 12. Seeing such a massive wolf, the whole family should naturally have been terrified. But strangely, none of them felt any fear. Instead, they all stood there watching in fascination. Terry later said that at that moment he could not understand himself why they did not feel scared or back away. The closer the wolf got, the more they seemed to fall into a kind of mesmerized trance. This strange lack of fear was itself a mystery. Because any healthy person would naturally feel afraid and run away upon seeing such a large wild animal approaching, but no one in this family did that. It was as if they were all standing there under the influence of some invisible force. Asterisk 13. The wolf came all the way close and began behaving like a tame dog. It was wagging its tail and showed no aggression. Terry's father then instinctively reached his hand out toward the wolf. He raised his hand to head height and began stroking the wolf's body. The wolf also pressed its head against his hand like a tame dog. The entire scene was unbelievable. A massive wild wolf had seemingly turned into a domestic pet. Terry and his family were watching in amazement. This was something none of them had ever imagined, even in their dreams. Asterisk 14. After staying this way for a little while, the wolf suddenly changed its behavior. It moved toward where the cattle calves were kept in a pen. One calf had its head sticking out through the bars of the pen, watching the wolf. The wolf spotted that calf and lunged at it. In an instant, the entire head of the calf was inside the wolf's mouth. The wolf was trying to yank the calf out through the gap in the bars. But the calf was too big to fit through the bars. Seeing this, the family members snapped out of their trance. They realized that their cattle and their livelihood were in danger. Asterisk 15. Asterisk. Terry shot the wolf with his gun. But even after being hit, the wolf showed no reaction. It was as if it felt no impact from the bullet at all. Terry and his son began striking the wolf with the back end of an axe. But that also had no effect. The wolf did not attack the people and only kept trying to pull the calf. It did not stumble or show pain despite the blows. It was as if this creature possessed some supernatural strength. Terry then took his high-powered rifle and fired another shot. But that also had no effect. Eventually, the wolf itself seemed to grow bored, let go of the calf, and slowly walked back toward the forest. Asterisk. 2020-year prison sentence warning cryptas. E4A and strange smells spread throughout the entire area. It was a horrible odor that seemed like a mix of something rotting and something chemical. It was not the smell of any normal animal. Terry and his family felt deeply uncomfortable from the smell. Later, every time a mysterious creature or supernatural event occurred, the same smell returned. The smell seemed to have become a sign of that otherworldly presence. It was so intense and unusual that anyone who smelled it once could never forget it. Asterisk 17. Asterisk 117. Asterisk. When the wolf disappeared into the forest, Terry and his son decided to track it. Because such a large predator was a serious threat to their cattle, they took their weapons and entered the forest. In one part of the forest, the ground was muddy and soft. The wolf's paw prints were clearly visible there. But after going a short distance, the track suddenly stopped. No more prints, no blood trail, no scratch marks in the ground. A massive creature had seemingly vanished into thin air. Terry and his son returned in complete bewilderment. They had no explanation for this mystery. Ask 18. Asterisk. During the first week at the ranch, Gwen experienced a very strange incident. She went grocery shopping, came back, and carefully put everything away. Then she left to do other things. When she came back a little later, all the groceries were packed back in the bags again. She was shocked and wondered if she had actually put things away or was simply misremembering. On the same day, she hung her towel in the bathroom before showering. After finishing her shower, she came out and found the towel missing. She got another towel and dried herself. Then she found the first towel hanging in a closet on the completely opposite end of the house. From these two incidents, she began thinking that perhaps her memory was failing her, or that she might be suffering from some kind of medical condition. Ask 19. Asterisk. During the first week, Terry also faced an astonishing incident. He was digging holes for a new fence. For this work, he was using a special tool that weighed about 70 pounds. In the middle of the work, he took a break, left the tool right where he had been working, and went inside to eat. When he came back, the tool was gone. He asked everyone in the house, but no one knew anything. A week later, while patrolling his property, he glanced up at a tree in the distance and stopped dead in his tracks. That 70-pound tool was lodged in the branches of a tree about 70 feet off the ground. Even if someone had wanted to place it there, getting it that high up would have been nearly impossible. Ask 20. Ask. Shortly after arriving at the ranch, Terry began seeing lights on his property at night. At first, they looked like headlights from a vehicle. He thought someone had perhaps wandered onto his land by mistake. But the lights appeared so frequently that he began thinking someone might be illegally hunting on his property. One night, he angrily headed toward those lights to confront whoever it was. But as he got closer, he realized there was no sound. If it were a vehicle, he would have heard the engine. As he got even closer, the lights began retreating from him without making any sound, then floated straight upward into the sky and disappeared. Ask 21. Asterisk. During the winter, one of his cows went missing. Terry searched the entire property at night with a torch. Finally, he went toward the forest where the giant wolf had disappeared on the very first day. At the edge of the forest, what appeared to be cow hoof prints were clearly visible. He followed them inside using his torch. But after going a short distance, just like the wolf's tracks, the cow's tracks also suddenly stopped. Over the rest of that winter, 4 more animals disappeared in the exact same way. Every time, the tracks went into the forest and ended at a certain point, with no trace of what happened after. Ask 22. Toward the end of winter, Terry began secretly patrolling his property at night. One night, while hiding behind a bush, he spotted something strange near the tree line. It looked somewhat like a small stealth fighter jet. No sound at all. It was hovering about 20 feet above the ground. It was emitting multicolored lights that it was shining down onto the ground below. The object was slowly moving along the edge of the forest. Terry shifted slightly to get a better angle and made the tiniest noise against the brush. Instantly, the lights on the object went out, and it turned to face directly toward Terry. Terry felt immediately that it had heard the tiny sound and was now staring right at him. He was terrified. After a few moments, it simply flew away. Asterisk 23. Asterisk of 1995, the situation had gotten far worse. Along with the cattle disappearing, some cattle began reappearing on the property hours or days later in random locations. That their condition was horrifying. It looked as if a skilled surgeon had very carefully performed an operation and removed certain parts of their bodies. The cuts were so clean and precise that they could not be the work of any wild animal. There was no blood anywhere around the area, no footprints or signs of any struggle. 24. Another terrifying development began at night. Strange humanoid figures started appearing around the house after dark. They had no facial expressions and no features. Long black silhouettes simply walking around. Sometimes these figures would come right up to the windows of the house, place their hands on the glass, and seem to peer inside. But they had no faces. They would tap on the glass and speak in a language that Terry and his family could not understand at all. This became so regular that it was nearly impossible for anyone in the family to sleep. Because of the constant lack of sleep, the entire family fell into a terrible state. Terry's children began performing poorly in school because they were getting no sleep at night. Gwen lost her job at the bank because she could not function properly due to sleep deprivation. The whole family fell into a state of extreme mental and physical breakdown. They looked to each other for comfort, but no one could comfort anyone else. Because everyone was going through the same fear and suffering day after day. Pasquarts. One night, while Terry was sitting on the porch with his rifle keeping watch, he saw an orange glowing orb in the distance. It was different from the other lights he had seen before. Terry looked at the orb through the high-powered scope on his rifle. Through the scope he saw that it was actually an oval-shaped opening, like a portal or doorway. Inside the portal, he could see blue sky, as if a door had opened to another place filled with daylight. Terry watched in shock as a black humanoid figure crawled out through the portal, dropped onto the ground, and ran off toward the forest. 27. After the portal incident, blue glowing orbs began appearing on Terry's property. Every member of the family agreed that these blue orbs were the most terrifying thing they had experienced. This was significant because by then they had already seen faceless black entities tapping on their windows. Yet, they still said the blue orbs were the worst. The reason was that whenever a blue orb came close, a strange sensation would overtake them. Suddenly, an unbearable anxiety and terror would grip them, and as soon as the orb moved away, that feeling would disappear just as suddenly. 28. 21. While Terry was sitting on the porch, the blue orb appeared on his property. His 3 dogs spotted the orb and began growling and barking. Terry unleashed his dogs, hoping they might chase the orb away. The dogs took off, running toward the orb. The orb began retreating. Terry thought that finally he was winning something. The dogs chased the orb into the forest. Then from inside the forest came the sound of his dogs yelping in pain. Terry was too terrified to go and check. He went inside and locked all the doors and windows as they had been doing. 29. 29. The next morning, Terry and his son went into the forest to look for the dogs. In a clearing in the forest, they found 3 burned circles on the ground. Inside each circle there was nothing but ash. 3 circles for 3 dogs. The dogs had been completely vaporized. No bones, no fur, only ash. Seeing this, Terry understood that staying in this place was no longer possible. He made the decision to sell the ranch. 30. Astri decided to sell the ranch and went to a local news outlet to share everything that had been happening on his property. The story was published and gradually spread to other media outlets as well. Around this time, a billionaire named Robert Bigelow came across this story. Bigelow was extremely passionate about paranormal research and had already invested millions of dollars in it. He saw this as a great opportunity. 21. Robert Bigelow had already built a scientific research team before purchasing the ranch. The team is called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDEAS for short. The team consisted of PhD scientists and researchers from various universities. Bigelow had deliberately chosen people who did not believe in the paranormal. He wanted skeptical and highly intelligent scientists so that if they ever found evidence of something, it would be credible and taken seriously by the world. Ask. 32. Ask. Bigelow purchased Skinwalker Ranch and made it the headquarters of NIDS research. Terry Sherman sold the ranch but stayed on as the ranch manager, because the scientists and researchers had no experience managing a ranch. Terry also wanted to find out what the research would reveal. He was deeply curious about what was really happening on his property, so he stayed and began helping the researchers. Ash. 33. Ash twins. The first year, the NIDS researchers mainly focused on verification work. They checked whether there were any plants in the environment whose spores could cause hallucinations. They tested the water supply. They conducted psychological assessments of the family members. They gathered information from neighbors and locals. During that first year, no major unusual activity occurred. Only some strange lights were spotted occasionally. But after all the tests, the researchers concluded that the Sherman family was not lying and that the events could not be explained by environmental or psychological causes. Hast. 34. Hast. One day Terry and Gwen were tagging newly born calves, placing small tags in their ears. A yellow tag was placed in the ear of one particular calf. They then moved on to tag other animals. About 40 minutes later, their dog began growling in the direction of that calf. When they turned and walked back over, they found that the calf they had tagged just 40 minutes ago had been surgically dissected. Only its legs and head were left. Everything else was gone. Most remarkably, the ear with the yellow tag had also been removed. Asterisk 35. Asterisk 35. The NIDS veterinarian came to examine the wounds on the calf. He said the cuts were so precise and clean that it looked as if a skilled surgeon had performed this procedure on an operating table. No wild animal could have made cuts this perfect. There was no blood on the ground anywhere around the area. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. This had all happened within 40 minutes while everyone was nearby. Asterisk 36. After the calf incident, the entire team began searching the property. The researchers noticed that the guard dogs at all 4 observation posts that had been set up across the property were all facing the same direction and were cowering at the back of their cages, trembling with fear. The researchers headed in that direction. Suddenly, Terry spotted something in a tree. Perched on a branch of the tree was a massive wolf-like humanoid creature. It appeared like a wolf standing upright on 2 legs. Every single researcher present saw it clearly. Asterisk 37. Asterisk Terry fired his rifle at the creature sitting in the tree. It immediately vanished. The entire team rushed into the forest to search. They found enormous footprints with large claw marks clearly visible. But those tracks also stopped suddenly after a short distance. No further trace of any creature could be found. Only that familiar rotting chemical smell was present. The same smell Terry had noticed on the very first day after encountering the giant wolf. Asterisk. Several weeks later, Terry and Gwen were heading out to work on one part of the property and passed by the corral where 4 of their most prized and valuable bulls were kept. They made a mental note that the bulls were in their enclosure. After finishing their work on the other side of the property, they came back and rounded a corner from where they could see the corral again. The bulls were not there. Terry panicked and ran over to check. The gate was still locked exactly as before. No signs of any struggle. Then Terry suddenly glanced at a small old trailer sitting right next to the corral. It had not been used in years and its entrance was wired shut. Asterisk 39. Asterisk. Terry looked through the window of the trailer. He saw all 4 massive bulls crammed inside that tiny trailer, standing calmly and pressed together. They were completely quiet, as if in some kind of trance. No fighting, no panic. But when Terry called out, they suddenly snapped out of it and became terrified, kicking and thrashing wildly. It took hours to get them out. The most astonishing detail was that the wire on the trailer's entrance was completely intact, and the cobwebs in the corners of the door frame were undisturbed. It seemed the door had never been opened. Asterisk 40. The NID's researchers later examined the bars of the corral and found that a section of them had become intensely magnetized. To investigate whether magnetic fields had any connection to the strange occurrences, 2 NID's researchers took compasses and went out around the property to take measurements. Suddenly they smelled the familiar, rotting metallic odor. At the same time, the needles on their compasses swung away from north and pointed toward the direction of the smell. They both felt as if they were being watched. After a few moments the smell went away, and the compass needles returned to north. Toward the end of 1907. One of the most terrifying events of all took place. Two NIDS researchers were stationed at night on a ridge overlooking the homestead. They saw an orange glowing orb appear near the house below. One of them had infrared goggles. Looking through them, he could clearly make out that it was an oval-shaped portal. It sounded exactly like what Terry had described seeing from his porch. A black humanoid figure crawled out of that portal. Ashed, 42. Asterisk, the figure that emerged from the portal began running up toward the ridge. Both researchers froze with fear. That familiar, rotting metallic smell arrived. They could hear the sound of the creature's feet on the shale rock as it ran up the hill. The creature passed within about 30 feet of them at a full sprint and continued up the mountainside. Both researchers watched the entire thing happen directly in front of their eyes, but were too terrified to do anything. Asterisk. 4-3. In 1998, unusual activity at the ranch declined significantly. Occasional lights were seen, but no major events occurred anymore. The NIDS team remained on the property and continued their research. But by 2004, the research was not producing meaningful results. So Bigelow shut down the NIDS operation. Asterisk 44. Asterisk. Over 10 years of research, the NIDS team had gathered a considerable amount of data. There was footage of unusual lights. There were photographs of cattle that had been surgically mutilated. There was evidence of magnetic fields. There were hundreds of eyewitness testimonies. But none of it could be presented as definitive and conclusive proof of anything. Asterisk 45. Asterisk, the researchers always felt that whatever they were searching for was always one step ahead of them. They would always catch glimpses of events but could never capture direct proof. It seemed as if some intelligent entity was deliberately staying just beyond their reach. Ask. 46. Asterisk that they never felt in control of the situation. It always seemed as if the entity or entities were the ones controlling the situation. The humans were merely witnesses. This feeling caused the researchers immense psychological suffering. Asterisk 47. Asterisk, it was the late 1990s. There were no smartphones or high-quality portable cameras that everyone could carry. So even though many events were witnessed, capturing good quality photographs or video was not possible. If these events had been documented with modern technology, far more evidence might have been obtained. Asterisk 48. Asterisk. Several members of the NIDS team later wrote books about their research experience. In those books they described in detail what they saw and felt. Every one of them believes that genuinely supernatural events took place at Skinwalker Ranch. Ast. 29. Ast. Even today, many people consider Skinwalker Ranch to be the most credible location of paranormal activity on Earth, because it is the only paranormal case where a full scientific team conducted research for an entire decade. Asterisk 50. This entire story has divided people into two camps. One group believes these were real supernatural events. The other group believes the whole thing was a massive hoax. But what remains true is that this case faced far more scientific scrutiny than any other paranormal claim, and even the scientists who investigated it were never able to fully explain what happened there.